You know, I can never, ever get enough 90s nostalgia. So let's talk about the orange years. Welcome to the Film Threat Podcast. I am Chris Gore. Hope you're having a good day. And it's always a good day for me when I get to talk to documentary filmmakers. And this one in particular is near and dear to my heart. Let's bring on the filmmakers, Scott Barber, Adam Sweeney, the guys behind the Orange Years, the Nickelodeon story. Welcome to the Film Threat Podcast. Happy you guys are here.
We're happy to be here. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, it's exciting. We love Film Threat, and we love everything that you do, Chris. And so shout out to the Film Threat audience. Thanks for having us.
Well, thank you. And I wore this orange shirt today specifically in tribute to your movie. And the Orange Years. Now, I was not in the early 90s. I was not a kid. I was a dad. So, but I had kids that were addicted to Nickelodeon as a channel. The fact that, I mean, Nickelodeon launched, I mean, the whole idea of getting slimed, the whole, all those various shows and animation, the Rugrats, which I think was so groundbreaking, Ren and Stimpy, also a milestone and groundbreaking, other things like, you know, Nick at Night. First of all, just putting together a documentary that tells the story of how Nickelodeon came to be, the executives behind the scenes, and then collecting almost, you know, all of the key figures from the key shows on Nickelodeon and telling this epic tale. How did you pull all this together? Because just working on a doc myself, I just know, especially when you're working on something that's such a big topic. I mean, you could have done a mini series on for Netflix on this. It's such a big thing. What was your beginning point, other than say specific Pantone orange,
right,
for that Nickelodeon logo?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. We interview a bunch of people for this documentary. You know, if we focused on a movie or one show, you get your 4, 5, 10 core cast members and you're good. But we're like, oh yeah, for our first film, let's do it about an entire network for 2 decades. Yeah, let's do it. So we had a lot of people to interview, and luckily they were all super awesome. They were just as nostalgic to talk about the time when they cut their teeth, their early work, as we were, you know, from the other side of the screen. And it did get progressively easier, you know, at first when we're like, hey, we're 2 first-time filmmakers from Texas. We haven't shot anything yet. Want to be in our film? It was pretty rough, but it got easier and easier and easier. And as we got people, they'd call their friends and go, these guys are totally cool. You should totally do this documentary. So it got easier and easier and easier as we went, but it was like such a blast. We basically met like our whole childhood making this film.
Well, yeah. I'm sorry, I interrupted you, Adam.
No, you're totally good. It was an arduous task, right? To be able to make contact with everybody, because the way that we kind of set it up is that we had kind of a 3-tier structure where we said this would be the perfect lineup, like the who's who of Nickelodeon. And then we said, okay, this would be a good enough version, right? And then we had our list of this is the bare bones, the cast that we have to do in order to be able to adequately tell this story and do justice to Nickelodeon. And we got fortunate, thanks to the generosity of, you know, really almost 100 people behind the scenes that helped us out. And so you're right. It's interesting because once you get that, then the task is, okay, well, how do we fit this all into 90 to 98 minutes? Right? Because you're right. I mean, it's not just the story of 20 years, right? This is a story that you could go on to right now and add another 20 years to it. Right. So yeah, it was an exciting challenge, to say the least. And, you know, hopefully we did everybody the service, you know, because Scott nailed it. It was like every interview that we got to do, it was like opening up this Christmas gift. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like it was wonderful.
Well, I want to ask about the executives, because I do know, just from reading things at the time, people like Geraldine Laybourne, Vanessa Coffey, like these were key figures in the, and it really tells you, just having spent what little experience I've had in television, I work for various networks, but there was always that rare executive that you would meet that was also a creative visionary, right? There was the executives that were like, okay, this is a suit, you know, toeing the company line, more concerned about job security than the audience, right? And what I got from Geraldine Laybourne, even then, and Vanessa Coffey, is there was a vision. Early on in the documentary, I think with Geraldine was telling a story about like children and like what it must be like to be a kid at that stage of life. And the TV shows that like, and I never liked these shows, the shows that were just centered around selling toy lines, right?
Yep.
Not that there weren't toy lines, because I think one of the most genius things was that color orange, right? That orange, because I know from when I would go to Toys R Us with my kids, they didn't need to see a Nickelodeon sign. They saw this orange beacon in the distance at Toys R Us, and they knew that was the aisle that had all the Nickelodeon stuff. So tell me about like talking and also convincing these executives, Geraldine and Vanessa and whatnot, to be in this doc, because they really sort of lay bare like what their plan was and how they built this network.
That was a crazy process for sure. You know, Geraldine Laybourne, she was one of the last people that we interviewed for the documentary. Adam and I had basically resigned to, we're not going to get her. It's not going to happen. We're just going to build her up to be this amazing, mythical, beautiful creature that you don't get to see and wish that you had. And then we got word that she did, because she just doesn't do a lot of interviews. That's not something that she does, especially Nickelodeon, because a lot of times people try to goad her into speaking negatively about where Nickelodeon is now. And she doesn't want to do that. You know, she doesn't want it to seem as though the network is always going to be living in her shadow. So yeah, it was when we finally got to interview her, it was great. And I totally appreciate how candid they were and how open they were to speak about all that. But yeah, I mean, when you think about it, to get to talk to people like Geraldine Laybourne, Anne Sweeney, Vanessa Coffey. I mean, Vanessa Coffey alone, you can make a documentary about her. She changed animation completely. The work that she did with getting Ren and Stimpy, Doug, Rugrats, Rocko's Modern Life. I mean, that's insane that those are her first 3 shows that she goes out to find for Nickelodeon. She comes back with them, and they're 3 shows that are still huge to this very day, you know? So yeah, getting the execs was awesome. It was, and it, you know, getting to meet all these people that were stars that you grew up watching was certainly, we were starstruck. You know, Mark Summers, this is somebody that I watched, Danny Cooksey, but it was definitely, we were starstruck in a different way to get to meet people that were behind the scenes that we didn't know as kids. You know, we just saw their name in the end credits, but now to get to talk to them as an adult and be like, wow, you were basically responsible for like my childhood, was a really humbling and amazing experience.
You know, Scott and I talk a lot about the idea that we grew up idolizing Melissa Joan Hart and Kenan Thompson and Kel Mitchell and all of these amazing people. And now we find ourselves really idolizing Geraldine Laybourne and, you know, Anne Sweeney and Ann Kramer and David. I mean, you could go down the list, right? It's like basically if you were to put like George Lucas, John Carpenter, and then all of these other writers, you know, like, and all of these animators in the same room. And then you just go, hey, by the way, I heard that you guys, Adam and Scott, you're interested in film or in writing. Would you have any interest in hearing or taking part in a master course on how to create this? So we just ate it up, you know, because finding out, I mean, they were giving really the recipe, like you said, Chris, to this brilliant phenomenon, right? And they also did it in such a sincere way, which is so beautiful, right? Because you hit the nail on the head, right? Like, I mean, you know, just like you, Chris, just like Scott, and so many, you know, millions of people. I love Star Wars, right? It is just the biggest like cultural phenomenon that's happened ever. And in terms of pop culture, you can tell whenever something happens, like with Baby Yoda, versus whenever something happens where there are Sith troopers or Captain Phasma or whatever, right? And so that was just, you know, getting to hear how it came about, and the fact that it was rooted in compassion and empathy, or actually sympathy for children, that made the difference, right? And Geraldine Laybourne was a teacher. She came from a teaching background, and she treated and she valued children like they were her equals. And that resonates with us, right? Like there's a difference between being talked down to and then actually listening, which is what they did. They went and they did focus groups with children and asked them, what do you like? And that never happened before. Yeah. And so it's a beautiful thing to watch. And we learned so much, and we're still learning. Yeah. We're learning every day from them.
Well, I love that Nickelodeon was kind of born from a test with interactive TV, right? I remember when that was a big thing, like interactive TV, and just being a gamer, like in that era as well. I remember that actually really fascinated me, that like, I mean, as it turns out, like most people, when they watch TV, they don't want to be tasked with being interactive. When they play a video game, that's what I signed up for. But just having worked briefly on some interactive movies, I think that those are just not, they just didn't resonate. But from that experiment came Nickelodeon. And it's, what I loved also was hearing the stories about the marketing, like how the marketing was going to be approached. It's not like Google famously has that phrase, don't be evil. But I feel like I feel like Nickelodeon had this is for kids, right? And it hit kids at different stages of life too. They really, really paid attention. To me, Rugrats was such an innovation. I remember I had to take my kids to see the Rugrats in Paris when it opened in theaters. But the whole, even the concept behind that show, and the fact that Vanessa Coffey, they look ugly, you know, like the drawings are ugly. Like, and additionally, the idea that she fought for the idea of this is creators, right? Almost like all the creators were featured. So you knew who those people were who, you know, were behind those shows. There was a personality. These things, I mean, maybe we don't think they're huge now, but at the time were incredible innovations. I guess, I don't know, I'm just heaping praise. Allow me to do that. But I do want to ask about Kenan Thompson, just seeing him show up. Oh my God. He was, and to talk about that era and how that, like, I mean, he's a standout, you know, on SNL, like to this day. I mean, I'm so happy he's still there. But the fact that you got all of them, but like, where did you find all this rare footage? There's all this like VHS footage that's like home cameras, like, because I remember how unsophisticated cameras were in the early 90s. I remember having the camcorder where you kind of had that, like a newsman. You know, like
big thing.
You remember plugging it into like your TV so that you could watch it.
I remember that
happening, and so like it was always like the kids. We were like, "Hey, right there," and it's like, this is the worst film of all time. Why are we capturing this?
You know, that was another thing. You know, we knew our film was going to be very archive heavy because you know we're talking about something that happened in the past. And, you know, we knew we were going to have to show a lot of cool stuff, get our hands on a lot of cool footage from back then to help really tell this story well. So we just cast a very wide net. We got our footage any way that we could. You know, we would reach out to the creators and say, hey, do you have any master tapes that we could get? Because, of course, that's going to give us the best quality. And we got some from You Can't Do That on Television. I tell you, that's crazy to get the unedited footage from them, you know, or not unedited, but just the longer version than what aired here on American TV. Because You Can't Do That on Television, a lot of people don't know, but it was a totally different show back in Canada. They had like musical guests and like live segments and stuff. It's very crazy. So there were a couple of shows where the creators would give us their master tapes. And that was like, mwah, you know, when people would do that, that's going to be the best. We got, we would just Google VHS tapes. There was a Nick News VHS tape that we got. There was a Double Dare behind the scenes VHS that came out back then, and we got that. We asked people just if we would scour YouTube, and if we found people that went to like Nickelodeon studios, we would email them and be like, hey, can we use some of your VHS footage for our movie? And then, you know, just finding stuff online. We got footage from, I mean, so many different places. And it was a huge task to get that much archival footage, but it was also like a really fun task because we're just watching all these old bumpers and all these old shows and reliving our childhood. There was a guy, Scott Webb, who's featured in the documentary, who he was basically in charge of a lot of all those old bumpers like that. Aren't you glad you got your Nickelodeon? You know, he did one called Inside Out Boy that was about a kid who was on a swing and went over the bar and it turned him inside out. That was his power, was just to be totally gross. He was in charge of all that stuff, and he got us a lot of behind the scenes footage and those, like that whole thing about the Pantone orange thing. It was like this whole thing called How to Nickelodeon that only people on the inside got. He was instrumental in getting us some footage. But yeah, it was crazy to get all that footage, but it was also like just really fun to watch all that.
It's interesting because in the you know, in the business, they call that a brand guide, right? You create the brand guide. So did you guys get that brand guide?
We did. Scott sent us the brand guide. And so it was so cool because it was like, I mean, you know, like it showed examples of the commercials, like the promos. And it also had like this is not what we do. This is what we do, right? You know what I mean? Like how a brand guide should be. And so their approach at the beginning was to say, being an adult sucks, right? Like you have to shave, you get cut, you have to go to work. Like this isn't cool, right? Which is the exact opposite of what you always saw, right? You watch like remember the Got Milk commercial where the dude's like, it's a little kid and he's like, I'm drinking milk and I'm growing strong. And all of a sudden he's like this buff teenager or a college dude. And like a girl walks up next to him and all of a sudden he's like gulping down milk. Like they were doing the opposite, right? They were like, no, this is not what you know what I mean? Like this is like about how cool it is to be a kid, right? Like kids rule. Yeah. And it's just that simple. You know, also I would say really quickly is like, in terms of some of the other footage that we had, you know, Scott was right. We had to go like, you know, it's like we were buying like the Magic Johnson special or items like that, right? And it's like sometimes you have to go like the Nick News special whenever he talked about, you know, dealing with HIV. And so sometimes you had to do that on you had to go to you had to go to eBay. And then sometimes, you know, some of the footage that we got, we went to Vulcan Video in Austin, you know, and they were kind enough to just give us like, you know, we would hand them off, right? Because like like Scott and I don't live in the same city right now. So we would meet up like during the holidays and just hand off DVDs, you know what I mean? And so with that said, some of the footage obviously is going to be not high resolution. Right. So you have to get really creative with how you mask it. Right. And like how you come up with like the overlays in terms of editing. And so that was a really cool process and challenge to figure out as well.
We sort of realized that the older footage, at first we were kind of worried about it. We're like, no, this works, you know, because when you see that footage that is not HD, it takes you back. You're like, oh yeah. You know, when it's the 4:3 and it's low res. I remember on the how-to branding guide, one of the things they said was, don't ever start off by saying, hey kids. Right. Like that's the dumbest thing and it's like, that's genius, you know, because we're like, hey kids, like that's what you hear so much, but that's like, as soon as a kid hears, hey kids, they're like off, like you become a living embodiment of that. Hello, fellow kids, that Steve Buscemi meme, you know, and it's funny. The only time Nickelodeon did anything like that was on the Log commercial on Ren and Stimpy, which was making fun of that and saying how stupid that was. So yeah, it was getting to look at that how-to Nickelodeon thing was really cool.
Yeah, I just love that kind of inside detail that you guys provided in this. In terms of, if I could get into the weeds a little bit on the archive that you created, how did you manage those assets? Like, was it 100 hours, 300 hours? Did you have some sort of archive and labeling system? Like, how did you go like, okay, we have these photos on this drive, we have this labeled here? Because I feel like it's daunting when you're working on something like you did. You're telling this like decade plus story, the rise of this network and the impact it had culturally speaking. That's like, when you say you're going to do that at the beginning, that's like biting off like such a, I mean, it's such a huge thing.
Yeah.
How did you go about it without feeling overwhelmed? And then what were some of the organizational processes, if you wouldn't mind? Because I do know that there are filmmakers that watch and or listen to the Film Trap podcast. And I would like to, as Yoda would say, pass on what you have learned.
Yeah. It was crazy. We had so much, you know, we had so much archival footage. And we also had to keep track of what we had the rights to and what we didn't. You know, because we cited fair use for the Nickelodeon archival footage, but you know, YouTube clips and stuff like that. So we kind of did it by the chapters. Like, here's all the Nick News stuff. Here's all the Pete and Pete stuff. Here's all the Salute Your Short stuff. And then just kind of kept notes for if we had the rights for it or not. Because, you know, sometimes you email someone on YouTube and we're like, hey, I really want to use your footage. Is that okay? And you got to just wait. So yeah, it was, we kind of cross-referenced it, but it was, you're absolutely right. Like, and we love going in the weeds and talking about the technical aspects of filmmaking, because that was, you know, a huge part of the process was archiving all that stuff. But ultimately that's what we did, was we kind of put it by what chapter it was in. And then kind of within those chapters, like where we got it from. Like, we got this from Scott Webb, or we got this from YouTube, or we got this from, you know, we ripped it from a VHS ourselves.
And additionally, you know, the documentary footage itself and all the interviews, like, I mean, I would say these three things, like in terms of systems, Google Docs is absolutely your friend. Asana helps out a lot in terms of project management systems, and also Dropbox, right, are amazing. And so, you know, what you end up having to do also is, if you go based upon chapters, is you want to, you know, we had to transcribe a ton of interviews, right? And also, so transcribing services help out a ton because they're pretty accurate and they save you so much time. But additionally, we would go into each interview and then make sure that we had like a note on, this is what they're talking about, right? So it'd be like, okay, this is about slime. This is that Keenan's talking about, you know, all that. Keenan's talking about Melissa Joan Hart, or Larissa Olenek is talking about that, right? And so that helped out a lot to supplement the chapters and the editing, right? Because there are moments where it's like, you know, for a fact, you know, because there comes a flow to it, you know. So when Scott's like doing the, you know, or Sean, or, you know, anyone's doing the editing, a lot of it, they're looking for pieces to supplement that, right? And so then from there, you have to put in the overlay, like the actual archive footage, the B-roll to support it, right? And we work directly with, you know, an amazing animator, Jeff Johnson, who did some wonderful pieces that were so Nicktoon specific that really helped elevate some of those really great stories that Mark Summers and, you know, DJ McKell and other people like talked about with respect to the episodes. So yeah, there's a lot of work that goes into it, and, you know, credit to our editing team for everything that they did, because, you know, it's like that saying, like, how do you eat an elephant? It's like one bite at a time, right? Mm-hmm. When you have hundreds of hours or 100 hours of footage, that's just so overwhelming. Right. Like, and it's different. It's different than a narrative feature. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Like well, first of all, I use all those tools, Google Docs, Google Sheets.
Yeah.
I use, instead of Dropbox, we use G Drive, Google Drive.
Yep.
Just easier. I think, I'm not a Dropbox fan. That's maybe just a personal choice. And we use River, which is basically like Slack.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah. RYVER. River is amazing. It's free for teams of under 6. I'm curious about your, so you're the directors, co-directors, right? On this, obviously you have a hand in the editing, but how did you manage this editorial team? Because you said it so perfectly, Adam. It's like, you know, one bite at a time, right? Like, I tell my friends who I've written a couple books, and they ask me, well, how do you write a book? And I'm like, you don't write a book. You don't write a book. What you do is you write 1,000 words a day for 2 months.
Yep.
And then you'll have a book, because the average book is between 50 to 60,000 words. I try to write 2,500, 3,000 words a day. So I try to like, I spend 6 months thinking about a book and then I write everything in 1 month. But that is exact, Adam, what you said. It's just one bite at a time. Like you can't think about like you're making a documentary. You're making like, we're gonna do this section. We're going to do this piece. We're going to tell this part of the story. It's all going to build with something. But tell me about managing the editorial team, how many editors you had and how like you had to make like, I'm sure, and this is just with every movie, you know, you're looking at like, we got to cut that section out, you know?
I know. Oh my gosh. That's the worst. That's the worst feeling.
Right. You got like, well, we have the 2.5 hour cut. How do we get this to 90 minutes?
Yeah. And Scott can speak on it a ton because Scott was really kind of like he was like the Yoda on our team of the editing. So, yeah, I mean, he can talk about it a ton about how we broke it down.
Yeah. I mean, for us, the groove that we kind of got into, so we had 3 editors for this. Me and Sean Coffin, who was also our DP, and then a guy named Bradford Thomason. And Bradford was kind of the senior member because he had edited the Glow documentary and the Rock-afire explosion documentary. And Adam and I were fans of his, so we were really lucky to get to, you know, work with him on this. And what we personally found, first of all, what you said, that's exactly it. Because when you're looking at all this footage, both the interview footage and the archival footage, you're overwhelmed. I mean, where do you even start? You know, it's like when you're cleaning your house and you're just like, I don't even want to do anything because it's where do I even begin? And you have to know all your footage inside and out, you know, because sometimes it's something somebody said in an interview that takes you to the next chapter. And sometimes it's something in the B-roll that takes you into the next chapter. You know, as we're saying, okay, we need something to kind of take us from talking about the game shows or the early, you know, Double Dare into the next shows. What soundbite is that? You know, and if you can't, sometimes you don't find it with your interviews. Sometimes you find it in your B-roll. You know, there's a part we lead into a couple of parts with something from archival footage. So you have to know it just inside and out, which luckily for us, that was awesome because we're basically watching a bunch of interviews of people talking about Nickelodeon and then a bunch of old Nickelodeon shows and bumpers. So for us, for this, getting comfortable with all of our footage was fun. And that's exactly what we did. We just took it one chunk at a time. We divided it up into the chapters we knew that we would need. And then we just did it one chapter at a time. And then what helped us was to kind of divvy it up because everybody's got their own editing strength. You know, some people are really good with archival. Some people are really good storytellers. Some people are really good with the polishing and finding music. So what we would kind of do is one person would do like a rough pass over it and just get the basics. Here's the story. Here's everybody talking about you can't do that on television. And then another person would go over and add the B-roll and add the music. And I found that to be a lot better and easier to do than trying to get one section all the way done with one person is to kind of give everyone a breather and let everyone kind of use their own strengths and have one person start and just do the rough edit and then hand that over to another person to give it a polish. And I found that to be like the best way that we did it.
Well, also like, let me ask, what had to get cut? What did it kill you? Because I'm sure you had like this longish cut and you had to kill some babies. What got cut that I'm hoping is on an upcoming DVD or something?
You know, I think that we had I mean, there are so many stories that every person that we interviewed, it was probably realistically about an hour to 2 hours long. Mm-hmm. And so you could you said it at first perfectly, Chris, is that you could do a mini series about it. Right. And you could do a behind the scenes featurette of every single individual. Right. And the reality is, unfortunately, is that those stories, you just have to ultimately decide like what is serving the heart of this story in itself. And so, you know, I think some of the stories that we had with Graham Yost, where he was talking about some of the relationships that they had with the actors you know, Graham Yost did Hey Dude and went on to do Speed and Band of Brothers, and still does Sneaky Pete with Giovanni Ribisi. And that meant a lot. I think that a lot of the personal stories, like, for example, like Larissa Olenek talked a lot about like how much she loved game shows. And she loved the Nickelodeon game shows. And she's like, I'm so competitive and I love X, X, and X, right? I would have loved to have really honed in on those, but there just wasn't time for it, right?
Yeah.
Like, and ultimately you have to think about like, what is the story and what is the audience looking for, right? So are they wanting to know more about Larissa? I think the answer is yes. And I think that ultimately people would love to know everything about Larissa Olenek, because there's so much more beyond what she just like everybody, right? Like, you know, Chris and Scott, y'all are more than Film Threat and the Orange Years, right? But for the sake of this interview, we have to do this right now, you know, in a certain amount of time. So I think the personal stories would have been really fun, and to showcase more. And, you know, who knows, maybe down the road, if we're lucky enough, we can expand upon that, you know, as we tell other stories. Scott, what about you, man? I'm sorry, Chris.
Oh, sorry. No, you could do a book. I mean,
oh my God. Yeah, sure.
Like, I use a transcription service. So every interview that I'll do for a doc project that I'm working on, I'll upload it. It's a little processing time, and they're fairly accurate. I think it's also helpful to do like a paper cut, you know, like basically just a text edit of the interview, so you're getting the salient points, and whatnot. But I mean, I always like hearing what the different processes are for doc filmmakers. You know, I look at someone like Alex Gibney, I'm like, how does that guy make 6 documentaries? It's
crazy.
A year. I don't know. Hopefully one day I'll get to interview Alex Gibney and ask him that question, but really fascinated with the tools and the process. But you could technically do a book with all the content material that you have.
We totally could. And we could have made mini docs on all of these shows. You know, that's one thing that for me, it would have been amazing to go. I mean, like I said, we could go totally and do a doc about each show. So like Adam said, ultimately we had to say, we're telling the story of Nickelodeon. So when we go into the stories of the shows, it has to support that story. And if it doesn't, it had to get cut. And that's unfortunate. I would love to go more into that. And then just on a more lighthearted note, Nick at Night, that was one thing that we cut a Nick at Night section that, spoiler alert, didn't make it in. But I love the genius behind that. Like, they lost the entertainment channel, which went on to become A&E. They lost that. That's what used to be on at nighttime for Nickelodeon. And when they lost that, they had nothing. And like, we got to put something on, but we have no budget. What do we do? And so they just put on a bunch of 50s and 60s TV shows that nobody else was playing. So they got them for really cheap. Hey, all the kids are watching Nickelodeon. Let's put something on for their parents so it's still kind of wholesome and kind of fits. I just think that's genius. And I love that. I love that attitude, that DIY spirit that Nickelodeon always had.
It definitely was. I mean, they were at the time scrappy and then just became a ubiquitous brand. If you had kids of a certain age, that was it. They were Nickelodeon kids.
Yeah.
I mean, Nickelodeon beat Disney at the time. It was just so popular. Guys, this is one of my favorites, talking to you guys about this, because you really nailed it, knocked it out of the park. And Adam, you're pointing out before we started recording that you and I are in a documentary together, The Prequels Strike Back.
Yeah. So, yeah. I worked on that one with Bradley Weatherholt. It's such an insightful and I think appropriate, like timely. I think people now are becoming more fond of the prequels, and it's such a cool, like, scrappy, film about a reexamination of that, as well as the idea of the ring theory, which is really cool. And so, Chris, like, like anybody, if you haven't seen it, like, Chris's parts in The Prequel Strike Back are amazing. You should watch it. And
no, it was just fun, and it was also a way for me to even re-examine my initial reaction, because I think, Adam, maybe you had the same reaction I did. The prequels were so different and not what we thought that they would be, that I think our initial reaction was like, what the heck is this? This is not Star Wars. Yeah. And then when you look back, you're like, oh, well, yeah, it was different. And I think that there's a newfound appreciation, especially with the sequels. Let's not get into that. Like, you look back, and like whatever the sequels were supposed to be, I think it's a crime. Han, Luke, and Leia just should have been reunited in episode 7. Like, that's just, if you're an executive, the first thing you do is the 3 of them have to somehow come together. It should have been more about them, the first movie, and then you kind of hand the baton to these new characters who I also did really learn to care about, who didn't have really great payoffs, but whatever. But yeah, the prequels strike back. I think one of the best things about that, which I didn't know until I watched the documentary, is that the Emperor's theme,
yes,
is, in the celebration, you know, on Naboo at the end, it's the opposite. It's the opposite. I couldn't.
Yeah.
I'm like, I've been watching the prequels for years and didn't know that. Yep. And I'll tell you, like, just out of eyeline here is my Star Wars collection.
Yes.
See right there, Star Wars stuff.
So Chris, I'm a member of the 501st. So you're like speaking to my like this. Scott and I talk probably realistically at least 2 times a week about Star Wars and like what, I mean, just like everybody, like what should have happened, right? Mm-hmm. And what they're doing now, which is good.
Exactly. It's such an obvious thing. I feel like we could sit in a room and map out what the should have been.
Totally.
Because I feel like the problem is that with that, not to divert into the Disney Star Wars sequel trilogy, they made a checklist of things they thought were important, and it was the wrong checklist. It was completely the wrong checklist, because the one thing that George Lucas, he checked the box more than anything, was fun. That was it. There was no like, we got to do this, we got to do that, and that's, I think, the problem now in the studio or factory filmmaking, as some filmmakers, directors put it now. It's just factory filmmaking. You got to check these boxes. There wasn't the boxes I think that the fans would have wanted, and I think that was the big failing. And so I don't know. You know what? The Mandalorian's cool. I like a lot of the stuff. It feels like real Star Wars to me, more like real Star Wars. And the sequel trilogy, I don't know. We could do a whole other.
We should sometime. We should.
Oh my God, we should. Well, let's get on an email chain and make that happen. Maybe we should do like a live stream or something. I could talk about that for hours.
That'd be awesome.
Okay, good. All right. Yeah. Okay, cool. All right, let's do. All right, wait. Okay, I got to do it for my sponsor. Storyblocks. They're a supporter of the Film Threat podcast. I could not do this without them. Go to storyblocks.com/filmthreat, especially if you're a documentary filmmaker. There's 1 million+ stock footage clips. It's a service. You pay a low monthly fee. Go to storyblocks.com/filmthreat and check it out. You could be sitting here talking to me about your documentary where you used Storyblocks. Oh my God, Scott, Adam, thank you so much for being on the Film Threat podcast. It will not be the last time.
Not at all. Y'all are amazing. Chris, you know, you've done so much, and we're just really thankful that we get to be there. So thank you. And to anybody that's watching Film Threat and other aspiring filmmakers and current filmmakers, do it. Go for it. Because we need more of you, and we need more of the stories to be told. So thank y'all so much for taking the time.
Thanks so much for having us. This was so fun.
Well, you're gonna be back. I do want to remind people the Orange Years, the Nickelodeon story, is, by the time you see this, it's out, it's available, video on demand, all platforms, and I do think you could develop it into a series for like a Netflix. I don't know. Think about it.
I agree.
We'll talk more about it. We are.